neurons. And then under dayon sa motor neurons, we have the two subdivisions or two divisions under motor pathways. We have the somatic, which controls voluntary motions, and then we have autonomic nervous system, which controls mainly involuntary motions. Okay? Then, na-discuss din natin yung differences ng dalawa, yung somatic versus autonomic nervous system. Okay? Including the importance of this one, synaptic neurotransmission, the processes involved, ano yung parts ng chemical synapses, and also the processes for each parts. Okay? Yes, Ms. Laballero? And
Sorry,
then,
ma'am, natuplok ra po.
okay. And then we also discussed the step by step or the processes involved sa synaptic neurotransmission. Or this is actually the neural conduction or the neurotransmission. Okay? So yan yan. And then lastly, na introduce ko yung differences ng subdivisions under ANS. Okay? Ay sa kadali lang kay loading kayo. Ako sa ibalhin. Ayan. Okay, so under sa subdivisions ng ANS, di ba, we have parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So na-introduce ko sa previous or prior discussion yung differences ng dalawa. Una is yung based on anatomical feature. So, na-introduce ko yung preliminary part sa differences ng dalawa between para and sympathetic based on anatomical features. Ito yung table na yun. Again, for this table, it actually differentiates or distinguishes the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system based on anatomical criterion. So differences ng dalawa ulit based on anatomical criterion. Okay? So una, we have the origin or the roots of neurons. So recall lang, the sympathetic neuron, sa sympathetic neuron, they originated, yung neurons originated in thoracic 1 until thoracic 12. Okay? And also, meron ding mga sympathetic neurons sa lumbar 1 to lumbar 5. Okay? Region ng spinal cord. Okay? Region yan ng spinal cord. And then for cranial, ayan, cranial nerve, okay, or craniosacral. That is cranial plus sacral, no? Sacral nerves. Sila naman, they carry parasympathetic responses. Okay? So, naka-indicate na dyan, ano yung mga specific cranial nerve number and sacral nerve number that carries parasympathetic responses. And then we also discussed there the length of the neurons, differences ng sympa and para based on the length of neurons. So this is another anatomical criterion, anatomical structure, no? So nag-differ pod ang sympa and para-sympa based on the length of the neuron. Recall nga ang ANS, it is a 2-neuron setup. Okay, so dere sa table, it only describes the length, no, of preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron ng sympa and parasympathetic. So kung parasympathetic, long, short. So I will not discuss anymore what is preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron. Yun yung, di ba, yun yung not medical term, the terminologies we describe on the neurons present sa ANS. Again, yung ANS, meron siyang dalawang neuron. Yan lang yung tawag, yung terminology natin for the 2 neurons that is present in ANS. Yung una, yung neuron 1 is si preganglion, yung pangalawang neuron is si postganglion. Yun lang yun. Okay? And then, Based also on the length of the neuron, na-discuss natin yung location ng ganglion, kung saan lang malapit yung ganglion. Okay? So yung ganglion, ito lang yun ha, yung letter G. Yan yung ganglion. Yung bago, yung post-ganglion. Bago itong post-ganglion. Hindi yung space. Okay? Hindi po yung space. Yung bago lang. Bago yung post-ganglion. Yan yung ganglion, collection of neurons that is found in the peripheral nervous system. So saan ba mas malapit yung ganglion for sympathetic? So mas malapit siya sa left. And what is on the left? Spinal cord, which is part of the CNS. And then for parasympathetic, the location of the ganglion, okay, itong ganglion, malapit naman siya on the right. And ano yung nasa right? Organ, yung effector organ. So yun lang yung under location of ganglion. Okay, done with the location of ganglion. Now let us proceed with neurotransmitters. Okay, done na to. Proceed tayo sa neurotransmitters. Okay, okay. Quick recap lang. Okay, let's have a quick recap to check as well if you do really access the pre-recorded video. You can just type in the answer ha. Sige, question. Which part of the synapse, does the synthesis, storage, and release of neurotransmitter occurs? Which part of the synapse? Very good, Miss Abigail. It is on the pre-synapse. Diba? So, pre-synapse, doon nangyayari yung synthesis, storage, and release of neurotransmitter. Now, with regards to pre-synapse, another question. With regards to pre-synapse, is it a sending neuron or a receiving neuron? With regards to pre-synapse, very good. Ulit, Miss Abigail, it is a sending neuron. Very good, everyone. So, therefore, kung babalikan natin yung structure na to, if we try to go back on this structure, itong skeletal ha, skeletal illustration, kanya akong gi-magnify. Skeletal illustration. Okay? These gaps, if these gaps, ito ako i-highlight ha, if these gaps or spaces, here are the synapses, diba? Those are the synapses, the synapse. Yung pre-synapse, yun yung the one on the left side. So, dalawa yung synapse dito, dalawa yung spaces ba? If you try to magnify that synapse, okay, meron din tayong dalawang pre-synapse. Kasi per synapse, merong parts. Tatlo yung parts, diba, sa synapse. The pre, the cleft, and the post-synapse. Now, sa unang synapse, okay, yung pre-synapse is on the left side. The same with the second synapse. Okay, synapse. It is on the left side. Yun yung sending neuron. Okay? And recall, ANS is a two-neuron setup. Two-neuron setup ulit, yung ANS. And we have terminologies to name neurons. Ang neuron 1, itong neuron 1, yung kulay orange, yan yung pre-ganglion. Okay? Yung neuron number 2, kulay red, di ba yan yung post-ganglion. Okay? Neuron. Post-ganglionic neuron. Okay, that is why in the table, kung titingnan natin yung under sa neurotransmitter on the table, we have the preganglion here. Okay? Ibig sabihin, si preganglion, siya yung unang sending neuron sa unang synapse. Kumbaga, siya yung unang pre-synapse. Okay? Sending neuron. Okay, ano yung importance ng sending neuron? Doon nasi-synthesize, doon nare-release ang neurotransmitter. Okay? And given ulit this skeletal illustration, okay, for the first synapse, okay, for the first synapse lang muna ha. For the first synapse, if ang preganglion is the sending neuron, again, if in the first synapse, The sending neuron is the pre-ganglion. Sino ngayon yung receiving neuron? It is the letter G, the ganglion. Yung bago itong post-ganglion ba? Bago yung post-ganglion, di ba si ganglion? Siya yung receiving dyan sa first synapse. Okay? And then from this, from ganglion, magpapadala naman itong post-ganglion, magpapadala na naman itong second sending neuron ng another impulse. Okay? Okay, magpapadala naman siya ng another impulse. And again, sa second synapse, iba na yung sending. Sa second synapse, iba na yung sending neuron, and that is the post-ganglion. That is why nakalagay dito, pre-ganglion, then post-ganglion. These are the sending neuron, okay, or the pre-synapse, okay, sa ANS2 neuron setup. Okay? Bakit yung preganglion tsaka postganglionic neuron yung nilagay dito? Ulitin ko, sila yung sending neuron or the pre-synapse wherein doon yung synthesis, doon yung storage, release ng neurotransmitter. And very important yung neurotransmitter para ma-transmit yung impulses. Kasi yung neurotransmitter, if you try to define it, these are chemical signals. Sila yung mga chemical substances that carry, okay, that transmit signals, that transmit impulses. Okay? Now, specifically, for this table under neurotransmitter, okay, we will be identifying here kung ano yung neurotransmitter ang nagtatravel sa pre- and post-ganglionic neuron ng and parasympathetic nervous system. So, i-identify natin ano kaya yung neurotransmitter that is being transmitted sa pre-ganglionic and post-ganglionic neuron ng and parasympathetic. Knowing nga, sila yung mga sending neuron. Okay? Now, for sympathetic muna, for sympathetic nervous system, number 1, we have acetylcholine. Okay? Acetylcholine as the preganglionic neurotransmitter. Okay? Acetylcholine as the preganglionic neurotransmitter under sympathetic. And then for post-ganglionic neuron, we have here then catecholamines. In the name of, take note, in the name of norepi. Okay, we have norepi. Another is epinephrine. And also we have the dopamine. These are just abbreviation, ha? Isulat niyo yung buong word. Okay, you have to write the whole word. World. So we have norepinephrine, dopamine ulit. These are natural catecholamines. Now, sa third segment ng lecture, we will discuss this natural catecholamines, all about their biosynthesis. Mas i-discuss natin sila sa third segment ng discussion. Ilahang biosynthesis, what else, ilang metabolism, ano yung mga receptors where they bind into. So yun. But for now, please take note muna that the principal neurotransmitter here is the norepi. Take note, principal, the main neurotransmitter, the primary neurotransmitter here is norepinephrine. Also, i-take note nyo, both norepinephrine and epinephrine, these are adrenergic. Okay? These are adrenergic neurotransmitters. Again, these are both adrenergic neurotransmitters, norepi and epinephrine. Now, in most references, okay, most references sa pharmacology, ang sympathetic, when you read about sympathetic nervous system, tinatawag din siya as adrenergic nervous system. Okay? Now, why is it? Okay, recall natin in this figure. In this figure ulit. Recall, ito na lang. Okay. Recall na the one I unboxing, ito. The one I unboxing, this is said to be the post-ganglion. That is the ganglionic neuron, which releases the principal neurotransmitter. Again, the postganglion, it releases the principal neurotransmitter, which is norepinephrine. Okay? So, kung nagre-release itong postganglion ng norepinephrine as the sending neuron in the sympathetic nervous system, we tend to realize then na it is the norepinephrine that will be received later on, ultimately, by the effector organ. Kasi norepi yung nire-release niya, ang i-receive naman ng effector organ as the receiving organ is ultimately norepinephrine din. No? Now, ang norepinephrine, as I told you earlier, isa siyang adrenergic neurotransmitter. That is why once ang effector gland received norepinephrine, it will carry out adrenergic responses, adrenergic effects. Kasi niya, ultimately, at the end, sa effector organ, isang adrenergic neurotransmitter. So magre-release, magpo-produce talaga siya ng adrenergic responses. Okay? That is why sympathetic is also equivalent to adrenergic nervous system. Okay? Kumbaga, ang take-away learning nyo dito is that at the end of sympathetic na synaptic neurotransmission, ang matatanggap ng effector organ ng sympathetic nervous system ay mga adrenergic neurotransmitters. Okay? And as a result, as I've told you earlier, puro adrenergic responses yung effects kapag sympathetic nervous system. Okay, again, that is the reason why sympathetic nervous system is also known as adrenergic nervous system. Next, let's have parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system, for both pre and post ganglionic neurotransmitters, puro acetylcholine. Okay? Again, both the pre and the post ganglionic neurotransmitters are acetylcholine. Now, if this is the case, ang matatanggap na neurotransmitter, ng effector organ ultimately under parasympathetic nervous system ay isa ring acetylcholine. Okay? Kaya puro naman acetylcholine ang neurotransmitter involved sa parasimpa. Okay? So at the end, acetylcholine ang iyahang ma-receive sa effector organ. Okay? That is why effector organs in this nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, will carry out cholinergic responses. No? Cholinergic responses dahil sa neurotransmitter na acetylcholine. No? Acetylcholine, so cholinergic, okay, responses. So that is the rationale why parasympathetic nervous system naman is also known as cholinergic nervous system. Okay, again, ang tawag natin sa parasympathetic nervous system is also cholinergic nervous system. Okay? So, kung i-wrap up natin, Basically, kapag adrenergic, kapag cholinergic nervous system, this has something to do with the neurotransmitters, no? This has something to do with the neurotransmitters accepted or received by the effector organ. Okay? Sige. So done with neurotransmitter, let us have the receptors. Okay, now recap ulit. Recap ulit under receptors. Question, saang parte ulit ng synapse, again, which part of the synapse makikita ang majority of the receptors? Saan makikita? Very good, Miss Ortega, Remeliete, and all. Okay. Receptors majority makikita sa post-synapse. Okay? Now, ang post-synapse, okay, post-synapse ha, parte ng synapse. Okay? Ang post-synapse, question number 2, is it sending or receiving neuron? Is it sending? Okay, very good. It is considered a receiving neuron. Please don't be confused ha with the pre and post ganglion versus pre and post synapses. Okay? Ito lang yon. Pre and post ganglion, yun yung terminology natin sa neuron. Okay? Kaya siya. 'Di ba? 2 neuron setup ang ANS. Yung first neuron, ang tawag natin, terminology natin dyan is preganglion. Yung second neuron, that is the postganglion. Ano naman yung pre and post synapse? Please don't be confused ha. Ang pre and post synapse is parte ng synapse, yung parte ng space, yung mga space, 'di ba? May space dito. Ayan. Then may space, sorry. Sa 2 neuron setup, may makikita kang mga spaces. Okay? Kadali lang. Ito. Space. Ayan, space din dyan. Kung i-magnify mo yan, if we try to magnify that space, okay, we magnify the synapse, we can identify the parts of the synapse. Meron siyang pre, merong cleft, and post synapse. So yun. So please don't be confused sa pre-post ganglion and the pre-post synapse. So basically, balik tayo sa receptors. Okay? So basically, ang mga receptors ulit, in general, are post-synaptically located. I repeat, in general makikita sa post-synapses ang majority sa mga receptors. And as receptors, as receiving neuron, ang nire-receive nila, syempre may ire-receive sila kasi receiving neuron, di ba? Receptor. Ang ire-receive nila ay mga neurotransmitters. Okay? So it is the neurotransmitters that bind to the receptors. Now, based on this skeletal illustration ulit, okay? Based on this skeletal illustration ulit, the receiving neurons are the following. So, na-mention ko na kanina, sa first synapse, ang receiving neuron is the ganglion. Okay? Sa second synapse, ang receiving organ is the effector organ. Okay? That is why sa table, balik tayo sa table under receptors, you have there, nawala. Ayan. So we have ganglion and then the target organ. Okay? So yan yung reason bakit may nakalagay dyan na label ganglion and target organ. Kasi ito yung mga receiving neuron natin. Doon natin makikita yung receptor. Alright? Now, for both For both sympa and parasympathetic nervous system, they have the same um, receptors na makikita sa ganglionic neuron. Again, the same ang receptor na makikita sa ganglionic neuron, and that is NN receptor. Okay, NN receptor, that stands for nicotinic neural. Nicotinic neural. Okay, nicotinic neural receptor. Okay, NN stands for nicotinic neural receptor for both sympathetic and parasympathetic ganglionic receptor. Okay, now why is it the same? Bakit the same yung receptor na makikita sa unang receiving neuron ng um, ng para and also sa sympathetic nervous system? Bakit the same? Okay, that is simply because they accept the same neurotransmitters. 'Di ba? Kung babalikan natin yung table under neurotransmitter, yung sinesend na neurotransmitter sa preganglion ng both sympa and parasympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine. Okay? The same lang. Okay? Acetylcholine. Okay? The same lang naman ang neurotransmitter na nare-release ng unang sending neuron, which is the preganglion. So for both sympa and parasympathetic nervous system, same lang din yung receptor na tatanggap ng neurotransmitter. Okay? That is for the first receiving neuron. Okay? Which is the ganglion. Okay? Nicotinic, nicotinic, neural. Yan lang yung rationale. Okay? The same ang neurotransmitter nga ilang i-receive, the same lang po dapat ang receptor na makita dito sa first receiving neuron. Now, dito na sila nagkakaiba, no, sa receptors na makikita sa effector organ or target organ. Okay? Sa both para and sympathetic nervous system, magkaiba na yung receptors na makikita. So you know already what is the rationale, bakit magkaiba na this time. So for sympathetic, we have the alpha receptor. The alpha, usually written na siya, ana. Then we have the beta receptor. And then we have the dopaminergic or dopamine receptor. Okay, that is for sympathetic nervous system receptors under target organ or effector organ. And then for parasympathetic, ayan, parasympathetic, we have muscarinic and nicotinic receptor. Okay, so taken all together, these are the differences of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system based on anatomical structure. Okay, so I hope you were able to grasp the differences, no, based on anatomical criterion. Okay, now let us proceed to the next slide. Actually, lahat ng ide-discuss natin in this slide is being summarized already by this figure, by this table. Okay, so ano yung ibig sabihin ng next figure? So yung figure na to. Sige, recall natin yung differences nila based on anatomical criterion, based on anatomical structure. So we have here, ayan, we have here sympathetic and parasympathetic. Una, okay, based on anatomical structure, observable naman yung length ng neuron. Okay, observable yung length of neuron under sympathetic, length ng preganglionic, length ng postganglionic. The same with parasympathetic, observable yung length nila, kung short-long or long-short. So no problem with the length of neuron. Na-emphasize man dito. And then we have the neurotransmitters. As you can see here, preganglionic, the preganglionic neurotransmitter for sympathetic And parasympathetic, they have here acetylcholine. So the same. Base lang yapon ni sa table kanina ha. Again, preganglionic neurotransmitter for sympa and para acetylcholine. Pagdating naman sa postganglionic, okay, postganglionic neuron, dito na nagkakaiba ng neurotransmitter. Principal neurotransmitter, kapag sympathetic nervous system, we have norepinephrine, and then kapag naman parasympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine. Okay? And then with regards to the receptors, okay, balikan natin yung receptors. Similar lang yung receptors na makikita sa ganglionic, okay, portion, no? Similar lang yung makikita sa ganglion ng sympa and parasympathetic. Kasi nga the same acetylcholine yung nare-receive nila, okay, sa unang sending neuron. So somehow, no, this slide, this figure helps you reinforce the concepts that was discussed in the previous slide. Okay? Then pagdating naman sa mga target organs, ito yung mga effector organs. Okay? Both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, nagkaiba na yung receptors na makikita sa effector organ. Okay, under sympathetic nervous system, di ba, we have alpha, the beta receptors, and hindi lang nakasulat yung dopamine receptor or dopaminergic receptors. And then we have the muscarinic, and hindi rin nakasulat yung nicotinic, okay, receptor sa kabila, no, under parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so overall, yan lang yung summary. Okay, lahat sa diniscuss ko sa previous slide. Okay, so anatomical differences lang din to. Okay, moving on. Okay, let's proceed. For this slide, it tells something about sympathetic innervation ng adrenal medulla. Okay, so as the heading suggests, no, sympathetic innervation in the adrenal medulla. Now, what is adrenal medulla first? So, bago natin i-discuss yung process. Okay? Adrenal medulla, yan ay isang gland. Okay? Adrenal medulla, isa siyang gland. It is a gland that is found superior of the kidney. Meaning, makikita siya superior sa kidney, sa ibabaw ng kidney natin. Okay, superior of the kidney. Yan yung location ng adrenal medulla. Now, ano yung function ng adrenal medulla? Adrenal medulla, usually, it stores catecholamines. Okay? Adrenal medulla, it stores catecholamines or the adrenergic neurotransmitters. Okay? Now, based sa discussion ko kanina, ano yung dalawang adrenergic neurotransmitter na meron? You can use the abbreviation. Ano yung dalawang adrenergic neurotransmitter na meron? Okay, very good. We have the norepinephrine. Okay? We have the norepinephrine and the epinephrine. Okay? Ayan. So, particularly, ang adrenal medulla, okay? Please take note this. Ang adrenal medulla, it stores majority of iba yung na-circle ko, no? Majority of the epi, not the norepi. Okay? Again, yung adrenal medulla, it stores majority of epinephrine in the body. Okay? Epinephrine. Alright? Majority. Okay? Now, for this slide, you will be able to understand how adrenal medulla regulates the release of epinephrine in the body. Okay? Kasi nag-store siya, majority epinephrine. So for this slide, for this figure, i-discuss natin paano na-release yung epinephrine. Okay? Paano yung sympathetic innervation in the adrenal medulla? So suppose this is, itong part na to, being highlighted with color red. Suppose that is a sending neuron. Okay? Or this is the pre-ganglionic neuron. Diba? Sa sympathetic, okay? Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Yung unang sending neuron is the pre-ganglionic neuron. So suppose, again, this is a sending neuron, the pre-ganglionic neuron that releases acetylcholine. Diba? Acetylcholine yung nire-release, okay, under sympathetic. Okay, the same with para. But again, we're talking about sympathetic here. Again, we have the sending neuron that releases acetylcholine. Now, this acetylcholine will then arrive in the adrenal medulla. It will then arrive in the adrenal medulla. Now, ang adrenal medulla, it has a receptor that accepts acetylcholine. Okay? It has a receptor that receives acetylcholine. And that receptor is the nicotinic receptor. Based lang yapon niya sa table, application lang niya siya. Okay? So, yung unang receiving, di ba, is the nicotinic receptor. Okay? Now, kapag nag-bind yung acetylcholine into the nicotinic receptor, that causes stimulation of the adrenal medulla. Okay, that will cause stimulation of the adrenal medulla, and stimulation of adrenal medulla will cause release of epinephrine. Okay, again, stimulation of adrenal medulla, okay, that will cause release of epinephrine. Okay, knowing nga yung adrenal medulla, di ba, it stores epinephrine. So since na-stimulate siya, it will release epinephrine. And take note, once epinephrine is released by the adrenal medulla, it will be incorporated then into the blood. Okay, it will be incorporated into the blood. And kapag nana siya sa blood, systematic na yung effect. That will be that will be circulated, that will be distributed. Okay, that is why it will reach certain organs. Okay, certain organs in the body, causing sympathetic effect or adrenergic effects. So that is all about sympathetic innervation of the adrenal medulla. Okay? So overall, ano yung takeaway learning nyo dito? Okay, with regards to adrenal medulla, okay, ang inyong ma-realize diri, hindi kailangan ng dalawang neurons. Okay? Hindi kailangan ng dalawang neurons mula sa isang neuron, ipapasa yung impulse, hantod sa moabot siya sa effector. Hindi kailangan ng dalawang neurons. Isang ganglionic neuron lang, which is the pre-ganglion. Isang ganglionic neuron lang ang kailangan, which is the preganglion, and the receptor, the acceptor is nicotinic receptor. Then, pwede na din siya makapag-produce ng effect. Okay? So, that is under adrenal medulla. Yan yung specialization ng adrenal medulla, sympathetic innervation under adrenal medulla. Hindi na kailangan ng dalawang neurons pa. Kasi 'di ba pag ANS, I always emphasize nga meron siyang dalawang neuron. So, pasa, impulse, then pasa hanggang makapag-produce ng effect. But in this case, sa ako ang pagka-discuss, di ba, isang neuron lang. The preganglionic neuron, nag-release ng acetylcholine. Si acetylcholine nag-bind sa nicotinic receptor. Upon binding to the nicotinic receptor, na-stimulate si adrenal medulla, releasing epinephrine, nakapag-produce na ngayon ng effect, which is sympathetic effect, adrenergic effect. Okay? So that is all about sympathetic innervation of adrenal medulla. Next. Since under autonomic nervous system, we are done discussing or distinguishing the differences of sympa and parasympathetic nervous system based on this anatomical structure. This time, we will discuss naman the differences of these two subdivisions based on functional criterion. Okay? Or based on functions or actions, based on effects to selected organs. Okay? Again, this time naman, we will distinguish the differences ng para and sympathetic nervous system based on their functional differences. Okay? Now, under functional, we have two categories to discuss. Okay? Una, uh, we will discuss the general differences. Okay? So, yan yung una. And then, later on, we will discuss the specific differences. So, let us start with general differences, functional differences. Now, under general functions, kapag sympathetic, it is also known as fight or flight. I know you are all familiar with this sa human anatomy na discuss na yata ni. Kapag sympathetic, fight or flight. Whereas sa parasympathetic naman, it is rest or rest and digest. Okay, rest and digest. Now take note, ang sympathetic response, balik tayo sa sympathetic. So sympathetic response, it is the one that dominates. It is the one that dominates, okay, whenever we are stressed. Okay, whenever we are stressed or during stressful situations. Okay, during stressful situations. Example, naisunog, nga na ay disgrasya, nga na, okay, or nga basta stressful situations. Okay? And kapag naman parasympathetic responses, this is the one that dominates when at peace. Okay? Or during kanang ginatawag nato nga basal conditions. Again, kapag parasympathetic response, this is the one that dominates when we are at peace or during basal conditions. So what do we mean by general functions? Functions. I would like to clarify I-clarify lang nako as early as now kay basing na ay misconception along our discussion on the effects sa para and sympathetic nervous system. You may observe now, di ba? You may observe now na based sa general functions, they both have opposite effects or responses. Yung sympathetic fight-flight, rest and digest, parasympathetic responses. So somehow opposite effects. Diba? Opposite effects, opposite responses. Parasympathetic, basal conditions. When you say basal conditions, kanang normal ba? Normal condition na to. Kanang normal condition ng body, normal living. Kanang karon. Okay, normal. Okay? Then sympathetic, stressful, during stressful situations. So, di ba opposite? Somehow opposite ang ilahang effects. Now, although they sounded opposite, but please do take note that they do not necessarily cancels each other's effects. It doesn't mean nga kung opposite na ang ilang effect, kapag sympathetic situations, stressful situations, nakakancel na yung mga parasympathetic responses. Okay, dili ing ana. Okay? Again, it does not cancels each other's effect. It does not mean na kapag parasympathetic effect yung nagdo-dominate during basal condition, inactivated na ang sympathetic. Hindi po ganon. Or vice versa, yung the other way around. Hindi po ibig sabihin na kapag sympathetic effects yung nagdo-dominate during stressful situations, stressful cases, inactivated na or blocked na ang parasympathetic responses. Hindi po ganun ha. Okay? They do not cancel each other's effects. Instead, with regards to their opposing effects, it has something to do with the rule of dominance. Okay? Rule of dominance. Kung sino yung magdo-dominate ba. So, ibig sabihin, both sympa and parasympathetic nervous system are active. Both of them are active. However, during basal conditions, when we tend to quantify based on effects, no, the one that dominates is the parasympathetic responses. Kumbaga, mas active siya. No? Mas active ang parasympathetic responses during basal condition. Okay? And then when time comes na na-activate na yung stress sa body, so may mga stressful situation, ang sympathetic responses will shoot up. Okay? Dominating over parasympathetic responses. So, rule of dominance lang. No? Rule of dominance. Dili, ibig sabihin, inactivated ang isa, patay yung isa kapag parasympathetic ang nag-dominate, patay yung isa kapag sympathetic yung nag-dominate. Hindi po ganun. Both are active. Kuan lang, rule of dominance. Okay, basal conditions, nagdo-dominate yung parasympathetic responses. But when the time comes na ay sympathetic or stressful situations, mo shoot up ang sympathetic responses. It will try to dominate the parasympathetic responses. So, yun yung general functions nila. Okay? So, ang point dito, class, okay? Point dito, they do not cancel each other's effect. Okay? Meron lang bumibida depending on the situation. Okay? Next, let us proceed to the specific na. Okay? Specific effects or specific responses. I think you are all familiar already with this kasi I have given you a task or activity, diba, to identify the effects of sympathetic and parasympathetic on selected organs. Sige. So, ito yun. Okay? So, I've said earlier, ang sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, meron silang opposite effects. No? Meron silang opposing na description sa each other. Okay? By description, opposing yung effects nila. Now, that opposing effects has something to do with the functions na antonyms with each other. So, kumbaga, yung function ng specific function ng sympathetic, ka-antonym niya yung specific function ng parasympathetic. Okay? And it is already your task, no, to memorize this table. You have to memorize this table. Ang technique lang to memorize these specific effects of sympa and para in selected organs is that antonyms lang. Since magka-antonyms yung effect ng sympa and para, kahit yung sympathetic lang na effects yung i-memorize nyo, kahit sympathetic effects lang yung i-memorize nyo, okay na kayo sa table na to. Okay? Kasi if alam mo yung effects under sympathetic nervous system, okay, alam mo yung sympathetic activity sa mga selected organs, baliktarin mo lang para sympathetic effect na yun. No? So, yun yung life hack dito. Okay? Even in my case, during katong undergrad pa ko, the same sa inyo ha. Ang ako naging memorize is sympathetic. Then baliktaron na din ako. Okay? Para sympathetic na dayon na siya. Okay? Kaya the more nga inyong hang memorize tanan, the more pod nga mga limtan ninyo ang inyong gipang memorize. Okay? So for example, let's have number 1 sa pupil. Okay? Number 1, pupil or in the eyes. Although ma-discuss na ako ni siya, no? Mas ma-discuss na ako ni siya specifically pag abot nato sa receptors, maybe sa 4th segment ng lecture under autonomics. Okay? So, tagaan lang na ako muog something overview sa some of the parts here. So, number 1, sa pupil in the eyes, kapag sympathetic, okay, kapag sympathetic, there is dilation. Okay? Take note. Kapag sympathetic, there is dilation. Okay? By the way, na ako'y mga ikuan ha. Kay dili mao nga table ako ang na paste. Okay? Pero gikan gyapon ni siya sa Katzung. Okay, Katzung rin ako ni siya nakuha. So I'm referring to the pupil. Okay? Not this one. Sa pupil in general, diretso na ta sa pupil. Kapag sympathetic, take note. I-take note ninyo, dilation. Okay? Dilation. Kapag parasympathetic naman, pupil ha, pupils of the eyes, that is constriction. Constriction. Ayan. Okay? Question. Naabay medical term kapag constriction or dilation of pupils? Are you familiar with the medical term? Kapag constricted yung pupil, kapag dilated yung pupil. Any idea? Ano yung medical term? Kapag dilation of pupil. Let's start with dilation of pupil. Wala? Okay. When you say dilation of pupils, that is, medical term, that is mydriasis. Okay? Mydriasis. Never mind lang sa itong mga receptors ha. There is sa specific actions. Kaya natay separate segment to discuss deeply the receptors under actions of sympathetic and actions of parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? So again, sa pupils ng eyes, kapag sympathetic response, dilation. Medical term natin kapag dilated yung pupils, mydriasis. Okay, mydriasis. And kapag naman constricted yung pupils, that is meiosis. Yan yung medical term. Okay, medical term. Again, I'm talking about the specific responses, yung mga common lang. Okay? Then you can just read this. Okay? Next, effects in the heart. Okay, let's proceed to the heart. General na ta, in general gihapon. Effects in the heart. Kapag naman sympathetic in the heart, in general, no? Sa heart, in general, there is increase rate, no? Increase heart rate. Ayan. Increase heart rate. This is in general. Okay? In general, increase heart rate. Kapag sympathetic sa heart ha, we're talking about the heart in general. Ano yung sympathetic response sa heart? Increase heart rate. Ano yung medical term kapag increase heart rate? Is it tachycardia or bradycardia? It is, very good, tachy, no? Kulay red na lang, tachycardia. Again, I'm talking about the, specific for the heart. Okay? Specific response kapag sympathetic sa heart. Okay? Tachycardia. Therefore, antonyms lang naman, di ba? Antonyms lang naman. Pag parasympathetic naman, bradycardia. There is decrease of heart rate, slower heart rate, bradycardia. Okay? So, yan yung parasympathetic action. Okay? Bradycardia ulit for parasympathetic effect in the heart. So, baliktaran lang. Next. Ito namang sa arteries, particularly sa blood vessels, no? Sa arterioles, arteries, na ako'y specific or deep discussion ani sa 4th segment sa atong lecture. Under receptors nato ni siya mas ma-appreciate. So dili complex man gud ni siya nga topic, complex ang blood vessels medyo taas. So dili lang siya makaya nga isang table, isang row lang sa table under arterioles or blood vessels. And also we will have a deep specific discussion on the sympathetic effects ng blood vessels pagdating natin sa hypertension, which is higher level ng pharmacology. So for now, skip lang muna natin. Okay, sige lang, ako ni siyang ma-discuss. Utang ko muna yung sa arterioles, no? Or you can just read, kung gusto mo, you can just read this. Okay, but again, I will have a deep specific discussion on this, sa fourth segment siguro ng autonomics. Sige, proceed tayo sa glands. Sa tanawon sa nakuha kong na ay next slide. Okay, sige, proceed tayo sa glands. Ito yung mga glands, which includes the bronchial, okay, bronchial, no. Wait sa. Okay. Kadali lang. Okay. These are not glands, these are smooth muscles. Okay. Next, smooth muscles. So under sa smooth muscles, diba, we have the bronchial, okay, and then the gastrointestinal, and sa next slide, we have the urinary bladder. Okay? Yan yung sa smooth muscle. Pero, bago muna yung sa smooth muscle, let us have first the glands. Okay? Yung sinabi ko kanina, yung sa glands. Hindi po glands yung under sa bronchial, ha? Bronchial, GIT, and sa urinary bladder. Glands, this includes ito. Okay? Itong salivary. Wala po yung salivary, no? Sige. Okay, let's have na lang the sweat glands. Okay? The sweat glands, and insert nyo sa table. Please include lacrimal. Okay, lacrimal gland, and then salivary. Okay, under sa glands. Okay? So, wait para di mo magkalibog. Ayan. Inyo na lang ni siyang i-erase ang skin, then label ninyo glands, and then under sa glands, sulat nyo salivary, okay, and then lacrimal para organize, and then sweat gland. So ana na lang. Okay, under sa skin, erase nyo yan. So including the rest, including this, erase nyo. Okay? Sige, glands muna tayo. Particularly, let us have first lacrimal and salivary. Lacrimal and salivary glands. Kapag sympathetic, take note, kapag sympathetic, it inhibits secretion. Okay? Again, salivary and lacrimal glands inhibits secretion. Okay? Inhibits secretion. Yan yung general sympathetic response kapag lacrimal salivary gland. So for example, ng inhibition ng secretion, inhibited. So ano yung mangyayari sa salivary gland? Or ano yung implication sa mouth kapag inhibited yung secretion ng saliva? So there is dry mouth, no? So yan yung sympathetic, under sympathetic na ay dry mouth will happen. And then, kung lacrimal, diba? Kung lacrimal, sa eyes man na siya, walang lacrimation. Ano yung opposite ng lacrimation? There is dryness sa eyes, no? Dry yung mata. Walang pagluluha. Kasi nga, inhibited yung secretion ng fluid ba? Okay, yan yung sympathetic. General effect ng sympathetic responses for salivary and lacrimal glands. Again, inhibit secretion. So example, dry mouth, dry yung eyes, yung mata. Then pag parasympathetic naman, watery secretion. Okay, again, under salivary ulit and lacrimal, watery secretion. Okay? So, secreted na yung fluid. So, kapag sa salivary gland, there is salivation. No? Opposite ng dry mouth, there is salivation. Okay? For salivary glands. And then for lacrimal, sa lacrimal gland, yung sa mata, there is already pagluluha. No? there is tearing. Tearing kasi may secretion na ng fluids. Okay? Again, there is lacrimation. Lacrimation for lacrimal glands. No? Lacrimation. Okay? For lacrimal glands. There is tearing of the eyes. So, yan yung parasympathetic responses. Okay? Now, kapag naman sweat glands, okay, proceed tayo sa sweat glands. Okay? Sa sweat glands, actually parehas lang to, sweating. Label nyo under sympathetic, sweating. Ito din, sweating. Okay? So, sweating lang parehas. They only differ on what particular sweat glands being mediated by sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? Ano yung particular na sweat glands? Kasi meron tayong mga different sweat glands, di ba? O kung imo ning balikon ang original, di ba, na eccrine, apocrine. Those are examples of sweat glands. So, diri lang sila nag-differ kung unsa nga particular sweat glands being mediated by a sympathetic nervous system versus that of a parasympathetic nervous system. So, tandaan, kapag sympathetic, we have apocrine. Take note, apocrine sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands. Again, kapag sympathetic, we have apocrine sweat glands. Then kapag naman parasympathetic, we have eccrine. No, we have eccrine sweat glands. Okay? Now, saan ba located itong mga sweat glands na ito? Saan located yung apocrine? Saan located yung eccrine sweat glands? For apocrine muna. Okay? Yung apocrine sweat glands, ito yung located or found in the palms. Ito. In the palms or ito din ay makikita sa soles, no? Soles sa sa tiilan kanang kung sa Tagalog kanang talampakan kana soles ng feet. Ang palms kanang palad, no? Sa kamot. So generally kapag yung nagdo-dominate na pagpapawis ay sa palms o palms sa ba na silent L ba na or dili or sa soles baka ha yung nagpapawis, that is sympathetic sweating. Okay, so during stress, yan yung sympathetic sweating. Okay, whereas kapag naman parasympathetic, kapag parasympathetic, generalized ito. Take note, generalized sweating ito. Ayan. Generalized sweat. Okay? Sweating. General sweat glands in the body. Yung activated. Okay? Or nagdo-dominate. So, example ng mga general sweat glands, yung nasa likod, no? Kanang sa likod nato ba? Diba, grabe man na siya magpawis ang ato ang likod. Yan yung isa sa mga general sweat glands. Yung sa braso, sa hita, yun. Yun yung example ng mga general sweat glands. Okay? So, yan yung mga eccrine. No? Yan yung mga eccrine glands. Generalized. Okay? In short, kapag nagpawis ang buong katawan, it is para sympathetic response. Again, ulitin ko ha. Kapag localized, okay, again, kapag localized lang sa palms, sa soles, ibig sabihin, sympathetic response yun. Kapag generalized naman, yung sweating, parasympathetic yun. Okay? No, insert ko lang, ano ba yung importance ng sweating sa katawan? Why is it very important yung sweating mechanism sa katawan? Take note, class, na ang sweating, that is very important, that is very essential, no? For the maintenance of body temperature. Very important yan for the maintenance of body temperature. Yung tinatawag natin na thermoregulation. Thermoregulation. Okay, that is why very important yung sweating. Okay? Sige. Okay, balik tayo sa previous slide. Punta naman tayo sa smooth muscles. Okay, again, included under smooth muscles, we have bronchial smooth muscles, the GI tract, okay, the GIT, the bronchial smooth muscles, and then ito, urinary bladder. Ito lang yun. Okay, urinary bladder. Okay? Now, yung effects ng lahat ng to under smooth muscles, including ito, okay? Yung effects nila ay may kinalaman lang sa tone. Okay? May kinalaman sa tone. Okay? Or another term sa tone is yung pressure. Okay? Again, yung effects ng smooth muscles na to being mentioned, yung tatlong smooth muscles, it has something to do with the tone or pressure. Okay, yung actions, effects ng sympa and parasympathetic nervous system for these three smooth muscles, three organs, it has something to do with tone or pressure. Then, when we say tone or pressure, that simply tells us that if increase, in general if increase ang tone, contraction will happen in general. Okay? In general, kapag increase yung tone, contraction will happen. Then, if decrease naman yung tone, relaxation will happen. Okay? Relaxation will happen. Again I am referring to the overall, no? Overall or the ultimate effect ng lahat, no? Ng lahat ng to, ng lahat ng smooth muscles being mentioned, okay? Para paspas lang, ako lang siyang i-overall para dali lang, paspas lang ang flow sa discussion. So, take note, let's start with bronchial, no? Bronchial smooth muscles. Okay? Please take note that under sympathetic, no? And kapag sympathetic response, bronchial smooth muscle, the GIT and the urinary bladder, there is reduction of tone. Okay? In general. Okay? Reduction of tone. Again sa bronchial smooth muscles, GI tract, urinary bladder, kapag sympathetic response, there is reduction of tone. Okay, reduction of tone. Overall, kapag decrease ang tone, reduced ang tone, ano yung mafi-favor? Is it contraction or relaxation? If decrease yung tone, based on I have discussed, okay. So yung mafi-favor is relaxation. Kasi nga, in general, there is reduction of tone kapag sympathetic response. So sa bronchial smooth muscle muna. Sa bronchial smooth muscle, sabi dito relax, no? Relax ang bronchi. So ano yung medical term natin kapag relax yung bronchi? 'Di ba? There is broncho dilation or constriction. Broncho. Sige, kaya niyo yan. There is broncho dilation or constriction. Okay, very good. There is broncho dilation. Okay? Again, 'di ba, decrease in general. Sympathetic response in general for these smooth muscles, mapa-bronchi, GIT, urinary bladder, reduce ang tone, relaxation ang mafe-favor. So kung relax ang bronchi, bronchodilation yon. Okay, so that would be the sympathetic response for bronchioles. Okay, next sa GI tract. GI tract naman, relaxed. We're talking about the muscles, it has smooth muscles nga. Yung sa walls, yung nagko-control in general sa GI tract, relaxed. Okay? Relaxed ang GI tract. Relaxed yung stomach, relaxed yung intestine. Okay? And sabi dito, yung sphincter, of course, dahil relax ang GIT walls, relax ang stomach, relax ang intestine, common sense, dapat sirado gyud ang sphincter. When you say sphincter, yan yung muscle na nagko-control sa bodily opening. 'Di ba? Kung ang usa ka organ intends to store contents nga dapat i-excrete, example sa atong intestine, 'di ba? Naman tay bowel movement nga ginatawag. Now, yung sphincter, siya yung nagko-control kung kailangan na ba i-open para ilabas yung contents from that particular organ. Or kung sa urinary bladder, yung urine, na meron din yung sphincter, yung urinary bladder, yan yung nagko-control in general ng bodily opening. So, kung kailangan ng iihi, so, mu-open ang sphincter. Now, sabi natin dito sa walls, GIT, relax man. Relax ang atuang stomach, relax ang intestine, overall, relax yung GI tract. Okay? So, kapag relax ang GIT muscles, di ba, reduced yung muscle tone ng stomach and intestine. Now, what do you think will happen to the contents inside the stomach or in the intestine? Will it move or not? Walang pressure ha, mababa yung pressure, walang tone sa GIT muscles. Will it move or not? Yes or no? Will the contents move or not? Relaxed yung GI tract. No movement. Okay? Very good. There will be no movement kasi relaxed. Okay? Walang pressure na nag-digest, ganun. Okay? Dili gud wala good digestion. Dili gud ka nang dominate yung action ng muscle sa GIT. Okay? So, relax. So, most probably, no movement of the contents inside the GI tract, inside the stomach, inside the intestine. Okay? That is why close, no? Contracted. Kung man kag-constrict, close yan, no? Constrict, close yan. Okay? That is why contracted yung sphincter. Kasi nga, wala namang ilalabas kasi hindi naman nagko-contract yung muscles inside the GIT. So, it will not move. Therefore, question. Kung wala siya nag-move ang contents inside the GIT, would it cause constipation or bowel movement? Would it cause constipation or bowel movement? Tell me. Okay, very good. Okay? It will cause constipation. Okay? So, inyo ni siyang i-generalize dere. Ana. Masyag inyo i-overall ba? Kapag GI tract sympathetic response, there is what we call ileus. Ibig sabihin ng ileus, that is a term, no, medical term, there is loss of peristalsis, a loss of movement. There is retention, kung baga, ng contents. So, equivalent lang din yan. Kung may retention of contents, may ileus, may loss of peristalsis, ibig sabihin there is constipation. No? Constipation. So, net effect, basta sympathetic response sa GI tract, constipation. Ano lang? No? Ileus, constipation, sympathetic response for GI tract. Now, ano yung antonym ng constipation? Sige nga, tell me, ano yung antonym ng constipation? You know this? No? Letter D, gihapon nag-start. Constipation. Yes, very good. Diarrhea. No? Opposite antonym ng constipation, there would be diarrhea or there will be what we call bowel movement. No? So, nanay bowel movement. Okay? Ayan. Okay? Or diarrhea. Question. Kapag bowel movement or diarrhea, is it greater tone or lesser tone sa GI tract? Na move out man ang contents Is it because na greater tone or lesser tone? Very good. Greater tone ngayon sa GI tract. Kasi nga, para sympathetic response. Diba? Pag para sympathetic response, higher, greater yung tone. Okay? So that will tend to move the content in the GIT. Okay? On the GI tract. Kasi nga, may pressure na, may tone na diarrhea. Okay? So that's for GI tract. No? So please take note of this responses. Sige, let's proceed to urinary bladder. This is another smooth muscle, no? I-apply pa rin. Applying pa rin yung decrease tone, no? Kapag sympathetic. Kapag sympathetic, wala masyadong pressure, decrease tone. Sige, this time, you tell me, based on what I have mentioned earlier, under sympathetic, which is lesser, which is reduced yung pressure, what do you think? What do you think will happen? Will there be urination or urinary retention? Will there be urination or urinary retention? Decrease yung tone kapag sympathetic. Very good. There will be urinary retention. Okay, base lang gihapon ganina. Pareha sa GI tract, no? GI tract walang tone sa GIT, walang pressure sa stomach, sa intestine. There is retention of contents. That is why there is constipation. The same lang nga concept inyong gamiton sa urinary bladder. Decrease yung tone, therefore there would be urinary, sulat nyo, ano na lang ninyo, i-summarize ba? Urinary retention. Okay, that is why tingnan nyo yung sphincter. Contract. No? Nag-retain raman. No? Nag-retain raman ang urine. Close lang yun ang sphincter. Wa man siya igawas, no? Nga ihi. So, close lang, contracted yung sphincter. So, in general, urinary bladder, smooth muscle, sympathetic response, urinary retention. And then, kapag naman parasympathetic, there is, opposite, antonym lang dayon, antonym, there is urination. Okay, because again, there is greater tone. In general, there is already greater tone under parasympathetic responses. So please take note of these sympathetic and parasympathetic responses to the smooth muscles like the bronchi, the GI tract, urinary bladder. Okay. Let's have the penile tissues. Wala siya nakasulat diri. Paki-take note. Nara. Naa siya sa, gi-include siya sa genitourinary smooth muscle. So please take note, penile tissue. Ayan, penile tissues. Okay, there is ejaculation kapag sympathetic. Okay? And then erection naman kapag parasympathetic responses. So yan lang yung difference nila under penile tissue. Ejaculation, sympathetic. Erection, parasympathetic response. Okay, next. Uterus. Okay. Paki-highlight yung uterus. We only have, ayan. Di ba walay label sa parasympathetic? We only have sympathetic responses. No? We only have sympathetic responses under uterus. Okay, and that is relaxation of uterus. So please take note, sympathetic lang yung response for uterus, and there is only relaxation of uterus. And take note, we have a medical term pertaining to relaxation of uterus. Okay, take note, relaxation of uterus. Okay, dire ra ni taman ha, kamo na lang magtarong sa inyo hang notes. Ana ba? Dire na taman. Okay? So again, sa uterus, relaxation medical term is lysis, no? Tocolysis. Okay? Again, tocolysis, yan yung medical terminology. Dapat familiar mo sa mga medical terminology kay medical student biya mo. Okay? So, medical terminology for relaxation of uterus, tocolysis. And tandaan, walang parasympathetic equivalent here. Okay? Walang parasympathetic equivalent here. Okay, next. For this part, itong last part, sa metabolic functions, metabolism, you can just read this along, no? For now, you can just read this along kasi this concept nga related to the processes gluconeogenesis, glucogenolysis, lipolysis. Although na-encounter na ninyo sa biochemistry, I know you are familiar with this term, mas ma-discuss nato ni siya sa higher pharmacology. Dili ni siya under sa pharmacology 1 nga course topics no to discuss. Pharmacology 2 nato ni siya mas ma-discuss. Okay, but for now you can just read this along kung gusto gid mo og more knowledge no sa sympathetic responses on this metabolic functions. So overall, these are the differences of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in terms of functions, no? In terms of functions or actions, okay? Nila sa selected organs. Okay? And that is the end of autonomic nervous system in terms of their anatomical structure and functional differences. Okay? So, yun. So, natapos natin yung autonomic nervous system nga differences ha, based on anatomical structure, based on this specific effects. Okay, let us continue. At this juncture, my goal is to finish cholinergic, no? Cholinergic transmission. If mag 11:30 na, you can leave ha, but I will just continue. Kuan lang ni siya, murag mag-extend lang ko mga 5 minutes lang yun. Dali ra kayo ni ang cholinergic transmission. But again, you can, okay ra mag-leave mo pagka 11:30 na kay basing na mo'y klase. It's okay. Para ma-record lang yun na ko siya, di siya maputol. Okay. Now, at this juncture, let us proceed to the transmission mechanism. Now, regarding transmission mechanisms, we will discuss cholinergic and adrenergic transmission. But my goal for this video or virtual lecture is until cholinergic transmission lang. Okay? So, for this topic, we will discuss the specific events, no? Yung mga specific events, yung mga specific processes that is involved in the transmission of impulses. Okay, so let's start with cholinergic transmission. So I'll start with some or few recall questions. Sige, number 1. Okay, recall question muna. Number 1, kapag cholinergic, is it sympa or parasympathetic? Is it S or PS? Cholinergic. Very good. It is parasympathetic. Now, kung parasympathetic siya, cholinergic, saan ito related? Is it acetylcholine or norepinephrine? Very good. Okay, is it acetylcholine or norepinephrine? Saan ito related? Very good. Acetylcholine. Okay, so let us discuss. Let us discuss the cholinergic neurotransmission based on this figure. This would be the last figure, no, nga ako i-discuss. So, one step at a time lang, para dili mo ma-overwhelm aning figure, I will divide it into 3. Ayan. I will divide it into 3 parts. Ayan. Kasi, di ba, if you try to look at this figure, this is just a chemical synapse. Diba? And what are the parts of chemical synapse? Tatlo, diba? Tatlo yung parts ng synapse. We have the pre-synapse. Yung nasa gitna, ito yung cleft or synaptic cleft. And then we have the post-synapse. Sige, let's start with pre-synapse ulit. Now, what did I tell you about pre-synapse? Recall that under pre-synapse, we have the following processes: storage, synthesis, and release of neurotransmitter. So, unahin natin yung synthesis. Again, we're talking here about cholinergic neurotransmission, cholinergic under parasympathetic. Okay? So let's start with the synthesis. Okay? Again, unahin natin ang synthesis of the neurotransmitter involved in cholinergic neurotransmission. And what is that transmitter involved in cholinergic neurotransmission? That is acetylcholine. Okay? So, capital C na siya. Okay? So, synthesis of acetylcholine. So, discuss natin yung mga steps. Steps that is involved here. Okay? So, number one, let me magnify first the pre-synapse nga part. Ayan. So, regarding the synthesis of acetylcholine, we will particularly discuss here how acetylcholine is being synthesized. Kasi nga, synthesis, di ba, of acetylcholine. We will learn how to synthesize, how acetylcholine is being synthesized, how it is being produced in the pre-synapse. Now, there are certain raw materials needed to synthesize acetylcholine. So, ano yung mga raw materials na kailangan natin to synthesize acetylcholine? Number one, we have, ayan, choline. Okay? Again, we have the compound choline. First step, okay, involved is that yung choline, itong choline, from the extracellular part ng pre-synapse, again, itong choline na nasa labas, na nasa outside, okay, ng pre-synapse, it will undergo active uptake. Okay? Again, itong choline found in the extracellular part ng synapse, it will undergo active uptake. Or simply, pag sinabing active uptake, it will enter, no? It will go inside the pre-synapse. Papasok siya inside the pre-synapse. Now, this active uptake, okay, or pagpasok ng choline, it will only happen in the presence of this transporter CHT. Again, yung active uptake ng choline, that will only happen in the presence of a transporter. So, naa siya'y sakyan, no? Before siya maka-enter sa pre-synapse, yung choline na raw material. So, again, kailangan ng choline. Ang CHT, what is CHT? That is choline transporter. Okay, kailangan niya ang choline transporter to enter the pre-synapse via the process active uptake. Now, suppose nakapasok na yung choline. No, nakapasok na yung choline via CHT. Once found available in the pre-synapse, it will react with acetyl coenzyme A. Familiar mo ani sa biochem, acetyl coenzyme A. Again, kapag available na yung choline inside the pre-synapse, it will react with acetyl coenzyme A, acetyl CoA. Okay? Recall in your biochemistry, sino yung organ na nagpo-produce, ano yung part ng cell na nagpo-produce ng acetyl CoA? We have the mitochondria. Diba? It is the mitochondria that produces acetyl-CoA. Now, this reaction of choline plus acetyl-CoA, it will produce already the neurotransmitter na acetylcholine. Okay? And take note, in order to facilitate the synthesis of this acetylcholine, this reaction will require an enzyme. Okay? Etong reaction na to, bago mag-proceed, it will require an enzyme to catalyze the reaction. And what is that enzyme? That enzyme is what we call the chat. Okay? Yung CH80 dyan. Chat. Chat stands for choline, okay, acetyl transferase. So please take note, yung chat, that is an enzyme na kailangan to catalyze the synthesis reaction ng acetylcholine. Okay? Again ha, ang tawag natin sa chat, choline acetyltransferase. Kailangan ito para mabuo yung acetylcholine. Okay? Now, as the term suggests, ang chat isa siyang transferase enzyme. Okay? Isa siyang transferase enzyme. Particularly in the reaction, it will facilitate a transfer of a group. Diba? So sa reaction na to, acetyl-CoA plus choline in the presence of the enzyme chat, yung gagawin ng chat is it will transfer the acetate, okay? It will transfer the acetate or acetate group, okay, mula dito sa acetyl-CoA. Okay, asagi ka ng acetate. Siyempre, dito sa acetyl-CoA. So, ililipat niya, ita-transfer niya yung acetate papuntang choline. Kasi nga, transferase, no? Acetyl transferase. Okay? Then, acetate, so acetate plus, no? Acetate plus choline, that will cause formation of acetylcholine. Okay? Acetate plus choline, that will form acetylcholine. Okay? So based on this process, na-produce na yung acetylcholine. Okay? So we're done with synthesis. No? We're done with synthesis of acetylcholine. So yan yung process ng synthesis of acetylcholine. So after synthesis, proceed tayo sa storage. Diba? After synthesis, syempre storage. Okay, sige. Proceed tayo sa storage. And again, storage will happen in the pre-synapse pa rin. Take note ha, it will still happen in the pre-synapse. So magnify ko ulit. So suppose we have here already the acetylcholine, yung na-synthesize na acetylcholine. Now, acetylcholine will enter into the vesicle. Okay? It will now enter into the vesicle. Itong acetylcholine. Yung nakabox na blue. Okay? That will now enter the vesicle. Okay? And again, yung pagpasok ng acetylcholine dito sa bilog, dito sa vesicle, it requires another transporter na naman. Okay? Kailangan na naman ng transporter. Particularly, that transporter is what we call VAT. Okay? So, ano yung VAT? Yung VAT dyan stands for Vesicle Associated Transporter. Okay, again, VAT stands for Vesicle Associated Transporter, VAT. So again ha, entry of acetylcholine into the vesicle, it happens through VAT. Okay? And take note class, yung entry na yan, yung pagpasok ng acetylcholine into the vesicle, that is a very important process. Very important yun kaayo na nga dapat mo enter ang acetylcholine na na-synthesize into sa mga bilog-bilog, into the vesicles. Why is it very important to store? Why is it very important to store acetylcholine into the vesicles? Okay, yung rationale dito has something to do with the presence of enzymes. Okay, yung rationale dito is or has something to do with the presence of enzyme sa pre-synapse. Recall sa ato ang previous pre-recorded discussion, I have mentioned that sa pre-synapse, Okay? Meron ding somehow presence of enzymes. Naalala? So come to think of it, paano kapag itong acetylcholine hindi siya nakapasok sa vesicles? Ibig sabihin, it will be exposed to enzymes. Diba? It will be exposed to enzymes. Ano yung implication? Okay, ano yung implication ngayon kapag na-expose yung isang neurotransmitter, isang substance sa enzymes? Okay? Tandaan, if acetylcholine will not be stored in these vesicles, if it will not be stored, if it will not be stored in the vesicles, it will be prematurely metabolized. Okay? It will be prematurely metabolized. Kayo na lang mag-take down ha. Kasi enzymes. Di ba pag may enzymes, ang ating ma-relate is metabolism. Okay? So if that will happen, yung na-synthesize na acetylcholine hindi nakapasok sa vesicle, na-expose sa enzyme, na nagkaroon ng premature metabolism, okay, for acetylcholine. Obviously, succeeding events or yung mga proceeding events will not happen eventually. Okay? Wala na yung release, no? Lesser na yung release ng neurotransmitter, wala nang magbabind the neurotransmitter on the postsynapses and so forth. Yung mga the succeeding events will not proceed if dito pa lang may premature metabolism na ng synthesized acetylcholine. Okay? So kumbaga yung rationale is, or yung takeaway nyo dito is kailangan itago ang acetylcholine para di ito masira. Okay? Hindi siya ma-degrade by the enzymes present in the synapse. Okay, so we're done with storage. Okay? Sige, yung pangatlo. Hapit na, gamay na lang yun. Okay, we have release. Okay? So, ang release, ulit, naagihapon siya under sa pre-synapse. So, question, importante ba ang calcium ion for the release of neurotransmitter? Yes or no? Is it important yung calcium ion for the release of neurotransmitter? Yes or no? Sige, hula lang. It is. Mamula na nag-function ng utok. Sige. So, yung calcium ion, kung inyong i-recall inyong notes sa previous pre-recorded discussion, calcium ion is very important for the release of neurotransmitter. That is why, as you can see here, okay, as you can see here, the calcium enters via calcium ion channel. Okay? It enters via calcium ion channel. And whenever it happens, it causes movements of the vesicles. Okay? Once meron ng calcium ion, that causes eventually movements of these vesicles. Okay? Until such time nga yung mga vesicles na to containing the acetylcholine will be attached to the docking proteins. And what are these docking proteins? Example ng docking proteins sa figure, we have the VAMPs and the SNAPs. Okay, we have the VAMPs and the SNAPs. So, ito yung mga kulay orange. Kaning mga kulay orange. Ayan. Yan yung mga VAMPs and SNAPs. Okay, so naka-label man siya sa figure. Okay? So again ha, kapag nakapasok na yung calcium ion, that will trigger the movement of the vesicles into the docking proteins. Example of docking proteins, VAMPs and SNAPs. Yung mga kulay orange yan, yung parang mga kuryente. Okay? You can actually search no sa internet. One tab away lang naman na siya sa Google to search for the meaning of VAMPs and SNAPs. Tandaan nyo lang, VAMPs, that is vesicle-associated membrane protein, SNAPs, synaptosomal-associated proteins. You can search for the meaning. Tandaan nyo lang, isa silang docking protein. So again, whenever this vesicle attaches to the docking proteins, okay, release of neurotransmitter will happen. Okay? There will be release of neurotransmitter. Okay? Release of neurotransmitter that will happen. Okay? So, yan yung end result kumbaga kapag dumikit, nag-mix na yung vesicle sa docking proteins. Release diretso, no? Release of neurotransmitter. And ano yung tawag natin sa process of release ng neurotransmitter? Starts with letter E. Ano yung process of release ng neurotransmitter sa pre-synapse? Starts with letter E. Followed by letter X. It is exocytosis. Okay? So, yan yung process of release ng neurotransmitter in the pre-synapse. Exocytosis will happen. So, ito yung importance. Ito yung importance or essence why I let you familiarize the processes involved in pre-synapse, in cleft, in post-synapse sa prior nga discussion on autonomics. Okay? Para makarelate mo sa mga terms I've been using for upon the preceding discussion. Okay? So, we are actually done with the processes in the pre, okay, in the pre-synapse. We have the synthesis, the storage, and the release of neurotransmitter. Okay? Um, okay, I will just cut off na lang in this part. I will continue na lang the discussion for cleft, then sa post-synapses, next meeting. Okay? Sige. Kay taas-taas to good siya. Okay, so that would be all for this morning. Do you have any questions?